Captain Marcus Chun had seen many strange things in his 15 years exploring the galaxy, but nothing quite prepared him for the crystalline palace of the Valaran Empire that now stretched before him like a frozen waterfall of light and color. The palace walls seemed to breathe with inner luminescence. Shifting through colors Marcus had no names for in any human language he knew. His boots clicked against floors that felt solid but looked like they were made of compressed starlight. Beside him walked Lieutenant Sarah Park, his second-in-command, whose expression remained carefully neutral despite the overwhelming grandeur surrounding them. "Remember the briefing," she whispered without moving her lips. "Much. This alliance means access to the Valaran trade routes, and that means humanity gets resources we desperately need." Marcus nodded slightly. He knew the stakes. Earth needed this treaty. The colonies needed this treaty. Millions of lives depended on what happened in the next few hours. The Valaran Empire controlled 7 star systems in a crucial sector of space, and their emperor had finally agreed to meet with human representatives after 3 years of ignored requests. The doors ahead opened without anyone touching them, revealing a chamber so vast that Marcus could barely see the far walls through the assembled crowd. Hundreds of beings from dozens of species filled the space. He recognized some. The insectoid Kreshna diplomats with their chittering translator boxes, the gas-dwelling Phaseans in their containment suits, the reptilian Zor merchants who traded across half the known galaxy. All eyes turned to watch the humans enter. Emperor Thalaric sat upon a throne that seemed to grow from the floor itself. All organic curves and crystalline edges, he stood as Marcus approached, revealing his full height of at least 7 feet. His skin shimmered with iridescent patterns that flowed across his body like oil on water. His eyes were large and dark, containing depths that suggested intelligence far beyond human measure. "Captain Chun," the Emperor's voice resonated through the chamber without need for technological amplification. "Your people have been persistent in seeking our attention." Marcus bowed in the manner his cultural advisors had taught him, keeping his eyes level with the Emperor's chest, rather than looking down in submission or up in challenge. "Your Majesty, humanity is honored by this audience and hopes to build a lasting friendship between our peoples." The Emperor made a sound that Marcus's translator interpreted as amusement. "Friendship is a concept that requires understanding, and understanding requires connection." He gestured broadly. "I have considered your requests for access to our trade routes and have consulted with my advisors about the best path forward." Marcus felt tension coil in his stomach. This was the moment everything depended on. "We have decided that a formal alliance requires bonds beyond simple agreement," Thalaric continued. "Among my people, such bonds are traditionally sealed through union, through the joining of families." The Emperor clapped his hands together once, and music began to play from somewhere Marcus couldn't identify. The crowd parted, creating a clear path through the center of the chamber. "I offer you a choice, Captain Chun," the Emperor announced. "Select one of my daughters as your diplomatic consort, and through this union, our people shall be joined in purpose and prosperity." 6 figures emerged from a doorway Marcus hadn't noticed before. Each one was a vision of Valaran beauty. They moved with grace that seemed almost choreographed, their bodies emitting gentle pulses of bioluminescent light that created patterns in the air around them. The first daughter wore robes of deep crimson that complemented her golden skin tone. His Valaran advisor stepped forward and announced her accomplishments. Military strategist, commander of 3 fleets, winner of the Imperial War Games for 5 consecutive years. The second daughter shimmered in blue and silver, her bioluminescence particularly bright. The advisor listed her scientific achievements: discoveries in quantum physics, improvements to faster-than-light travel, patents numbering in the hundreds one by one. The daughters were presented each more impressive than the last politicians. Artists, engineers, philosophers, each one beautiful beyond human standards. Each one accomplished beyond what most beings achieved in lifetimes. Twice as long the assembled crowd murmured with approval and anticipation. Marcus heard whispered conversations in languages his translator struggled to interpret. But the tone was clear. Which magnificent daughter would the human choose? Then a seventh figure emerged. She walked slowly, almost hesitantly. She wore plain robes of undyed fabric that hung simply on her frame. Without the flowing elegance her sisters displayed, her skin didn't shimmer with inner light, no bioluminescent patterns danced across her body. She kept her eyes lowered as she took her place at the end of the line. Emperor Thalarix barely glanced at her. "And Kessa," he said, his tone noticeably different from how he'd introduced her sisters. The advisor didn't step forward to list accomplishments. No music swelled. The crowd's murmurs took on a different quality. And Marcus heard what his translator identified as laughter. Kessa stood perfectly still, her hands folded in front of her. Apparently used to this treatment, Marcus looked at each of the daughters again. The 6 magnificent ones practically glowed with confidence and capability. Then he looked at Kessa, who seemed to be trying to disappear despite standing in plain sight. Something about the situation bothered him deeply. The way the Emperor dismissed her, the way the crowd laughed, the way even her own sisters seemed embarrassed by her presence. Seen this before. In human contexts, the overlooked one, the dismissed one. The one judged by surface appearance rather than actual worth. His cultural advisors had briefed him extensively on Valoran beauty standards and social customs. He explained that bioluminescence and empathic projection were highly valued, seen as signs of superior breeding and capability. Those who lacked these traits were considered lesser, regardless of any other qualities they might possess. Marcus made his decision. "I choose Kessa," he said clearly. The chamber fell silent. Then the laughter began, louder than before. Even some of the human delegation behind him made sounds of surprise and confusion. The 6 accomplished daughters looked at each other with expressions Marcus interpreted as disbelief mixed with amusement. One of them actually turned away, as if the choice was too absurd to witness. Emperor Thalarix's expression shifted through several configurations before settling into something Marcus couldn't quite read. "You choose Kessa?" the Emperor repeated, as if Marcus might have misspoken. "I do," Marcus confirmed. An advisor rushed to the Emperor's side and whispered urgently into his ear. The Emperor listened, then nodded slowly. "Very well," he said finally. "By our traditions, your choice must be honored, however unusual it may be." He gestured to Kessa. "Daughter, you will accompany Captain Chen as diplomatic consort to the human delegation." Kessa looked up for the first time, her eyes meeting Marcus's briefly before dropping again. In that moment, Marcus saw something in her expression that confirmed his instinct. Not gratitude, not excitement, but wariness. Been surprised before and disappointed. She had no reason to trust that this human would treat her any differently than her own people did. The ceremony concluded with formal declarations and the signing of preliminary documents. Through it all, the crowd continued their amused conversations, treating Marcus's choice as either a joke or an insult to the Emperor's hospitality. As Marcus and his delegation prepared to leave with Kessa, Lieutenant Park pulled him aside. "Sir, with respect, what were you thinking?" she asked quietly. "We could have had a military strategist or a scientist, someone who could actually help us." Marcus watched Kessa gathering her few belongings under the supervision of a bored-looking attendant. "I was thinking that anyone her own people treat that poorly might have something to teach us about seeing value where others don't," he said. Sarah Park followed his gaze and sighed. "I hope you're right, Captain." because we just made the strangest diplomatic marriage in human history." Marcus smiled slightly. Wouldn't be the first time humanity did something strange that worked out. As they boarded the shuttle that would take them to the Endeavor, Marcus noticed Kessa looking back at the palace one last time. Her expression was unreadable, but her shoulders seemed just slightly less tense than before whatever happened next. At least she was leaving a place where she'd never been valued. That had to count for something. The Endeavor hummed with its usual rhythms as it left Valoran space behind, engines pushing them toward the next scheduled diplomatic stop in the frontier territories. Captain Marcus Chun stood on the bridge, watching star patterns shift on the main view screen while trying not to think about the confused and sometimes hostile messages flooding in from various human diplomatic channels. Apparently, choosing the defective Velaran princess was already being called everything from a brilliant political maneuver to career-ending stupidity, depending on who was sending the message. "Captain, the navigational computer is acting up again," his helmsman called out. "Third time this week." Marcus sighed and made a mental note to requisition better equipment when they reached the next major station. The Endeavor was a good ship, but she was old, and old ships had quirky systems that needed constant attention. Kessa had been aboard for 3 days now, and Marcus had barely seen Hirsch taking the smallest available quarters, despite his offer of better accommodations. She declined offers to dine with the senior staff. She spent most of her time in the observation deck, or ship's small library, always alone, always quiet. The crew didn't know what to make of her. Lieutenant Park had reported that Kessa was polite when spoken to, but offered nothing beyond brief, efficient responses. It's like she's trying to take up as little space as possible. Sarah had said, "Maybe that's what she's learned to do," Marcus had replied now. He decided it was time to actually talk to his diplomatic consort rather than just observing her from a distance. He found her in the observation deck, standing before the transparent aluminum viewport with her hands clasped behind her back. She wore the same plain robe she'd worn when he'd first seen her. The stars looked different. "From a human ship," she said without turning around. Marcus stepped up beside her. "How so?" "Your viewports are larger," Kessa said. "Velaran ships have smaller windows, and they're usually filtered to enhance certain wavelengths that my people find aesthetically pleasing." She paused. "These viewports show everything unfiltered. We tend to prefer seeing things as they actually are," Marcus said. Kessa finally turned to look at him up close. Without the overwhelming presence of her luminescent sisters and the grandeur of the palace, Marcus could see details he'd missed before. Her features were delicate and symmetrical. Her eyes were a deep shade that reminded him of Earth's oceans without the distraction of bioluminescence. There was a quiet dignity to her appearance. "You don't need to maintain the pretense of interest in me," she said, her voice carefully neutral. "The alliance is secured, and I understand my role as a symbolic presence. What if I'm not pretending?" Marcus asked. Case's expression showed the first hint of emotion he'd seen from her. Skepticism. "Captain Chun, I have spent my entire life being overlooked and dismissed by people who had actual reasons to care about me," she said. "I do not expect strangers to suddenly find value where my own family found none." Before Marcus could respond, the ship's intercom crackled. "Captain to the bridge. We have a situation with the navigation system." Marcus excused himself and headed back to the bridge. But Kessa's words stayed with him over the next several days. Marcus began to notice things, small things at first. The navigation issue that had been plaguing them for weeks suddenly resolved itself when Marcus asked the engineering team what they'd done. They looked confused. "We didn't do anything, sir," Chief Engineer Rodriguez said. "The system just started working properly again." Then Marcus saw Kessa leaving the navigation room early one morning, when most of the crew was still asleep later that week. The ship's cook, a perpetually cheerful man named Tommy, mentioned that he'd been struggling to create meals that Kessa could safely eat without causing digestive issues due to biological incompatibility. But she came to the galley yesterday and showed me a simple preparation method that makes everything compatible, Tommy said. Clearly impressed. Took her about 10 minutes to explain it. And now I can make basically anything for her. Marcus started paying closer attention during a tense negotiation with a Zor merchant over fuel prices at a remote station. The discussion was heading toward an impasse. The Zor captain insisted on payment in rare metals that the Endeavor didn't carry. Marcus was preparing to leave and find another supplier when Kessa, who had been sitting silently in the corner of the room, spoke up. Captain Shar collects pre-space age artifacts, she said quietly. I noticed the display in his ship when we docked. The Zor captain's eyes widened slightly. You know of such things? I know that human culture from the 20th century is particularly rare in this sector. Kessa continued. Captain Chen's ship has a collection of music recordings from that era, preserved in their original formats. She looked at Marcus. Perhaps a trade could be arranged. 2 hours later, they had fuel at a reasonable price. And Captain Shar had a collection of vintage Earth jazz recordings that made him happier than Marcus had ever seen a Zor. How did you know about those recordings? Marcus asked as they returned to the Endeavor. I spent time exploring your ship's databases, Kessa said, and I observed Captain Shar's quarters during our docking procedures. You see a lot. Marcus observed. I have learned that observation is the primary skill available to those who are not expected to participate. Kessa said there was no bitterness in her tone, just fact. That night, Marcus invited Kessa to dinner in his quarters to his surprise. She accepted. They ate a simple meal that Tommy had prepared, something between human and Valoran cuisine that actually worked for both biologies. Why did you choose me? Kessa asked suddenly. At the palace, you could have had any of my sisters, all of whom are far more accomplished and impressive. Marcus considered his answer carefully. I chose you because of how you were treated, he said finally, among humans. We have a saying, judge someone by how they treat those who can do nothing for them. He met her eyes. Your family and your society's treatment of you told me more about them than about you. That is not logical, Kessa said. You knew nothing about my actual capabilities. No, Marcus admitted, but I knew you'd survived years of dismissal and were still standing. He leaned forward. Slightly. That takes strength. Kessa was silent for a long moment. Valoran culture values projection and presentation, she said finally. We are taught from birth that one's worth is determined by their ability to broadcast emotions, to light up a room literally and figuratively. She looked down at her hands. I cannot do these things. A genetic mutation that occurs rarely but is considered deeply shameful. My sisters can share their thoughts and feelings with everyone around them through empathic broadcasting. They can create light shows that inspire and move others. I have none of these abilities, which makes me defective in every way that my culture measures value. Then your culture is missing something important. Marcus said. Kessa looked up, startled. In human culture, we value what people do, not what they appear to be, Marcus continued. We've had to learn that the hard way. Through centuries of judging people by the wrong criteria and realizing our mistakes, we still mess it up sometimes. But we try. Something shifted in Kessa's expression. A crack in the careful mask she wore. I do not know how to be valued for what I do, she said quietly. I have never been given the opportunity to find out what that might mean. Then maybe this is your chance, Marcus said. The ship's alarm suddenly blared. Red lights flashing throughout the quarters. Marcus's communicator activated before he could reach for it. Captain, we're receiving a distress signal. Lieutenant Park's voice was tense. It's the colony on Hadrian's world. They're under attack. Marcus was on his feet immediately. I'm on my way. He turned to Kessa. You should stay here where it's safe. But Kessa was already standing. If you are going to face danger, then my place as your consort is at your side. She said, that is the tradition. Marcus didn't have time to argue. They reached the bridge together to find the crew already at battle stations. The view screen showed sensor data streaming in from the distress signal. It's the Crewth. Sarah Park reported a full raiding fleet. At least 20 ships. They've breached the colony's outer defenses and are hitting the main settlement. Marcus felt his stomach drop. The colony on Hadrian's world held over 50,000 civilians. How long until reinforcements can arrive? Nearest military vessels are 4 days out. The tactical officer said his face was grim. We're the only ship in range, and we're a diplomatic vessel. Marcus said, we have defensive weapons, but nothing that can take on a Crewth raiding fleet. He looked at the data streaming across the screen's 20 Crewth ships, all built for assault and plunder. His ship had light defensive cannons and shields designed to deflect pirates, not military-grade attacks. Set course for Hadrian's world. Marcus ordered anyway. Maximum speed. Captain, that's suicide. Someone said Marcus knew it probably was. But he also knew he couldn't leave 50,000 people to die. When he had any chance of helping, maybe. We can buy them time until the real military arrives, he said. Kessa had been standing quietly near the back of the bridge, observing the sensor displays. Now she spoke. Captain, may I see the complete sensor data on the Crewth fleet? Marcus nodded to the tactical officer, who transferred the data to a nearby console. Kessa studied it for several minutes while the bridge crew prepared for what might be their last mission. Their attack pattern is too efficient, Kessa said finally. The engineering bay of the Endeavor had never been so crowded. Chief Engineer Rodriguez stood beside Kessa, watching as she manipulated holographic displays showing the ship's communications array with a confidence that seemed to emerge from nowhere. This is insane, Rodriguez muttered, but he was already routing power conduits according to her specifications. You understand, we're essentially turning our primary communication system into a weapon we've never tested, based on a theory about alien hive mind technology. Yes, Kessa said simply, her fingers dancing across the controls. And if it doesn't work, we will all likely die when the Crewth fleet destroys us. She looked at him. But if we do nothing, 50,000 colonists will certainly die, and we will still likely be destroyed when the Crewth notice our presence. Rodriguez laughed despite himself. You know, for someone everyone said was useless, you make a compelling argument on the bridge. Marcus watched the countdown timer tick. Down 2 hours until they reached Hadrian's world. The colony's transmissions were becoming more desperate. Their shields were failing section by section. The Crewth were methodically dismantling their defenses while ground forces began landing in the agricultural sectors. Captain, we're receiving a transmission from the colony governor, the communications officer said. Marcus nodded, and a haggard-looking woman appeared on the view screen. Her clothes were covered in dust, and blood streaked one side of her face. This is Governor Chen of Hadrian's world, she said, and Marcus felt a jolt of recognition at the shared surname. To any ships receiving this transmission, we are under assault by Crewth raiders. Our defensive grid is failing, and we have maybe 3 hours before they breach our final shelters. We have 14,000 children in the primary shelter, and I am begging anyone who can hear this to help them. The transmission cut off, replaced by static. Marcus felt the weight of command settle heavier on his shoulders. Even if Kessa's plan worked, even if they somehow disrupted the Crewth coordination, his one ship couldn't fight 20 warships. Lieutenant Park stepped closer. Sir, even if we break their coordination, we're still massively outgunned. I know, Marcus said quietly, but we're all they have, down in engineering. Casa had assembled a team of 5 human engineers, all of whom looked at her with expressions ranging from skepticism to desperate hope. The quantum entanglement network the Cruoth are using operates on a very specific frequency band, she explained, pulling up waveform analyzers on the main display. Their biology requires this particular frequency because of how their neural structures process information. One of the younger engineers, a woman named Lisa Park, raised her hand tentatively. How do you know so much about Cruoth biology? Casa paused, and for a moment, something almost like embarrassment crossed her features. I have spent most of my life in libraries and databases, she said. When you are not permitted to participate in society, you have abundant time to study. I have read extensively on xenobiology, quantum physics, and communications theory. Among other subjects, Rodriguez whistled low. You're telling me you're self-taught in all this? I am telling you that knowledge was the only thing I could possess that my family could not take away or diminish. Casa said. She turned back to the display. Now, we need to reconfigure the communications array to emit a pulse on the exact counter frequency to their network. This will require perfect calibration and precise timing for the next 90 minutes. The engineering team worked with an intensity Marcus could feel throughout the ship. Casa moved between stations, explaining concepts, correcting calculations, and somehow managing to teach advanced physics while simultaneously saving lives. Marcus visited the engineering bay once to check on progress, and found Casa at the center of a storm of activity. She was explaining something about quantum coherence to 3 engineers simultaneously while also adjusting a calibration tool with her other hand. Captain, she acknowledged him without breaking her explanation. We are on schedule, though I would prefer another hour for testing. We don't have another hour, Marcus said. The colony's shields are failing faster than projected. Casa nodded. Then we will work with what we have. She finally looked directly at him. Captain, I should mention that this pulse will drain our entire power grid for approximately 40 seconds. During that time, we will have no shields, no weapons, and no maneuvering capability. We will be completely vulnerable. Marcus absorbed this information. How close do we need to be to the Cruoth fleet for it to work? Optimally, within weapons range of their command ship, Casa said. Marcus laughed, a sound with no humor in it. Of course we do. He put a hand on her shoulder. Casa, if this works, you'll have saved 50,000 lives. And if it does not work, I will have killed everyone on this ship. Casa said, the mathematics of moral responsibility are complex. The mathematics of doing nothing are simple. Marcus countered. Those colonists die, and we live with knowing we could have tried. Something shifted in Casa's expression, a resolve settling into place. Then we will try, and we will make it work. The Endeavor dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of the Hadrian's world system. The view screen immediately filled with the chaos of battle. The colony world hung in space, its orbital defense platforms already reduced to debris when a Cruoth ships moved in perfect formation, their insectoid hulls gleaming like carapaces as they poured fire into the colony's remaining shield generators. They haven't noticed us yet, the tactical officer reported. They're focused entirely on the colony. That gives us maybe one shot at this, Marcus said. He activated the ship-wide intercom. All hands. This is the captain. In approximately 5 minutes, we are going to attempt something that has never been done before. We are going to fly directly into a Cruoth battle fleet and fire a weapon that will leave us completely defenseless for 40 seconds. If it works, We break their coordination and give the colony a fighting chance. If it doesn't work, well, it's been an honor serving with all of you." He paused. "Either way, we're not leaving 50,000 people to die alone." The bridge was silent for a moment. Then Lieutenant Park spoke up. "Helm, plot a course directly toward their command ship." "Aye, sir," the helmsman said. And Marcus heard the grin in his voice. The Endeavor accelerated toward the Creweth fleet in engineering. Kessa made final adjustments to the modified communications array. Her hands steady despite knowing that any miscalculation meant death for everyone aboard. "The frequency is locked," she reported over the comm system. "The pulse generator is charged." "I am ready when you are, Captain." "Tactical. Status on the Creweth fleet," Marcus ordered. "They've spotted us," came the reply. 3 ships breaking formation to intercept on the view screen. Marcus watched 3 Creweth warships peel away from the main fleet. Their weapons charging. They were each twice the size of the Endeavor, bristling with cannons designed to crack planetary shields. "Keep our course," Marcus said. "All power to forward shields." The first Creweth ship opened fire energy. Bolts slammed into the Endeavor's shields, and the entire ship shuddered. Alarms blared as power levels fluctuated. Shields at 70%. Tactical called out, "Another hit like that, and we won't make it to firing range." "Kessa, how much longer do we need?" Marcus asked. 30 seconds to optimal range," her voice came back. Remarkably calm, another barrage hit them. The lights on the bridge flickered. Shields at 40%. Tactical reported the ship shook again. "Harder this time. 20 seconds. "Kessa," said Marcus, gripped the arms of his command chair and watched the Creweth command ship grow larger on the view screen. It was a massive vessel, at least 10 times the Endeavor's size, covered in the organic-looking armor that characterized Creweth construction around it. The rest of the fleet continued their assault on the colony, moving with that eerie perfect coordination. "Shields at 15%, Tactical said. "Captain, we're not going to make it. 10 seconds. Kessa said. Another hit rocked the ship. Sparks flew from a console on the bridge, and someone screamed. "Shields down," Tactical reported. "We're exposed." 5 seconds. Kessa's voice remained steady. The Creweth ships charged their weapons for what would certainly be a killing blow. Marcus could see it happening on the Tactical display. Multiple ships locking targeting solutions on the Endeavor's undefended hull. "Fire," Marcus ordered in engineering. Kessa activated the pulse. The entire ship's power grid channeled through the modified communications array and burst outward in an invisible wave of precisely calibrated quantum disruption. For a moment, nothing seemed to happen. Then, across the entire Creweth fleet, ships suddenly broke formation. The perfect coordination that had characterized their attack shattered. Like glass, ships veered off in random directions, some nearly colliding with each other. The barrage aimed at the Endeavor went wild, energy bolts shooting off into empty space on the bridge. The tactical officer stared at his displays in disbelief. "It worked," he said. "Their coordination is completely gone. They're operating as individual ships now. And they're confused." Marcus allowed himself one breath of relief before snapping back to command mode. "How long until our power comes back online?" 35 seconds remaining, someone called out on the view screen. The Creweth fleet was in chaos without their hive coordination. Individual ship. News traveled fast across the galaxy, especially news of impossible victories within 3 days of the Hadrian's World incident. Every major news network was broadcasting the story of how a single diplomatic vessel had defeated a Creweth raiding fleet using an experimental quantum disruption technique. What made the story even more remarkable was who had developed that technique: the defective Veloran princess. The one who had been laughed at during the diplomatic ceremony had become the talk of civilized space. Marcus watched the news feeds from his ready room. seeing Kessa's image displayed across dozens of channels. Some called her a hidden genius, others suggested she was a secret weapon the Valorans had planted. A few conspiracy theorists claimed the entire thing was staged. What none of them seemed to understand was the simple truth. Kessa was someone who had finally been given a chance to show what she could do. Captain, you need to see this. Lieutenant Park's voice came through the intercom with an urgency that made Marcus immediately head for the bridge. When he arrived, Sarah was standing in front of the main view screen, with her arms crossed and an expression that Marcus had learned meant serious trouble. We just received an official transmission from the Valoran Imperial Court, she said on the screen. A Valoran official Marcus didn't recognize stood in what appeared to be a formal communications chamber. The official's skin shimmered with the kind of bioluminescence that indicated high status. Captain Marcus Chun of the human vessel Endeavor, the official began, his tone formal and cold. The Valoran Empire acknowledges the recent military success at Hadrian's World and congratulates all involved. However, it has come to our attention that Princess Kessa's involvement in this incident has created a diplomatic complication. Marcus felt his jaw tighten. Emperor Thalarix, in his wisdom, has determined that the current arrangement does not optimally represent the Empire's interests in this alliance. The official continued, therefore, we formally request the return of Princess Kessa to Valoran space, where a more suitable diplomatic consort will be selected from among her sisters. This new arrangement will better reflect the prestige and capability that the Empire wishes to project in its relationship with humanity. The transmission ended. Marcus stared at the blank screen, feeling anger rise in his chest. They want to replace her, Sarah said. Now that she's proven valuable, they want to take her back and substitute someone more conventionally impressive. Send a response, Marcus said. Tell them we decline their request. On what grounds? Sarah asked. We need to be careful here, sir. The Valoran alliance is crucial to our trade routes. Marcus turned to find Kessa standing in the doorway to the bridge. She must have been listening. Her expression was carefully neutral, but Marcus could see tension in the set of her shoulders. On the grounds that I chose Kessa, and that choice was accepted according to Valoran tradition, Marcus said. They can't just undo it because it's suddenly inconvenient for them. Actually, they can, Kessa said quietly. She walked onto the bridge, and the crew members present fell silent. Valoran diplomatic law includes provisions for correcting unsuitable arrangements. My father can claim that my involvement in military actions violates the purely ceremonial role expected of a diplomatic consort. She met Marcus's eyes. He can order my return. Select one of my sisters, and the alliance will continue exactly as before. Just without you. Marcus said, just without me. Kessa confirmed. I am, after all, still the flawed daughter. The publicity changes nothing about who I am in their eyes. That's garbage. Rodriguez said from his station, you saved 50,000 lives. You're brilliant. How can they still think you're flawed? Because flaw, in Valoran culture, is defined by inability to bioluminesce and empathically project. Kessa explained, my accomplishments do not change my biology, and biology determines worth in my society. She turned to Marcus. You should accept their offer. One of my sisters would serve you better politically. Vesha, the eldest, is a master strategist who could actually help with military planning. Xanthi is a scientist whose credentials are recognized across multiple civilizations. Any of them would be a more valuable asset than I am. No, Marcus said flatly. Kessa blinked in surprise. Captain, you are not thinking logically. You're right. I'm not, Marcus interrupted. I'm thinking about what's right, which is different. He stepped closer to her. You were chosen. You accepted, and you've proven yourself 100 times over. I'm not trading you in like defective equipment just because your family finally noticed you exist. But the Alliance, Kessa started, can survive some tension, Marcus said. Lieutenant Park, send a formal response declining the Valoran request. Make it diplomatic but firm. Sarah nodded and moved to her station, though Marcus could see concern in her expression over the next week. The situation escalated. The Valoran courts sent increasingly insistent messages. Human diplomatic corps sent frantic communications ordering Marcus to comply. His superiors in Earth's Navy suggested, then demanded, that he return Kessa and accept a verse replacement. The political pressure was immense. Then the Valoran ships arrived. 5 warships dropped out of faster than light travel at the edge of the system where the Endeavor was undergoing repairs at a civilian station. They're not attacking posture, the tactical officer reported, but those are definitely military vessels. Hailing frequencies open. Communications. Added. Emperor Thalrix himself appeared on the view screen. His bioluminescence was particularly intense, creating patterns in the air around him that Marcus's translator interpreted as severe displeasure. Captain Chun, the Emperor said, you have repeatedly refused lawful requests for my daughter's return. This defiance cannot continue. Your Majesty, Marcus replied, keeping his voice level. With respect, Kessa was chosen according to your own traditions, and she has fulfilled every aspect of her role with distinction. Her role was to be a symbolic presence. Thalrix countered, not to engage in military operations or become a public figure. She has exceeded the bounds of appropriate behavior for one of her status. Maybe the bounds need to change, Marcus said. The Emperor's bioluminescence flared brighter, a sign of anger. You presume to lecture me on Valoran culture? I presume to suggest that any culture that wastes brilliant minds because of arbitrary biological standards might be missing opportunities. Marcus said he knew he was probably ending his career and possibly starting an interstellar incident. But he couldn't stop. Kessa saved 50,000 lives using knowledge she acquired on her own, despite being ignored and dismissed her entire life. That's not a flaw, Your Majesty. That's extraordinary resilience and capability. Before the Emperor could respond, Kessa stepped into view of the view screen. Father, she said, her voice quiet but steady, I request formal audience under the old traditions. The Emperor's expression shifted to surprise. Even his bioluminescence patterns changed. You invoke the old traditions? I do, Kessa said. I claim the right of proving. The bridge went silent. Marcus had no idea what Kessa was talking about, but the Emperor's reaction suggested it was significant. The right of proving has not been invoked in 3 generations. Thalrix said, it is an ancient custom. Ancient customs remain valid unless formally revoked. Kessa said, I have been chosen, I have served, and I have proven capability. Under the right of proving, I may challenge the claim that I am unsuitable for my position. The Emperor was quiet for a long moment. His advisors, visible in the background of the transmission, were having urgent whispered conversations. If you invoke the right of proving, you must face a formal challenge. The Emperor said finally, you must demonstrate your worth against one who is considered suitable. I understand, Kessa said. I am prepared to face any of my sisters in formal trials. Very well, the Emperor said. The challenges will be held on neutral ground, witnessed by representatives of multiple civilizations. You will face Thesha, your eldest sister, in trials of intellect, capability, and value. If you succeed, your autonomy will be acknowledged. If you fail, you will return to Valoran space and accept your proper place. I accept these terms. Kessa said. The transmission ended. Marcus immediately turned to her. What just happened? I invoked an ancient Valoran tradition that allows those deemed unsuitable to prove their worth through formal challenges, Kessa explained. It is rarely used because the trials are extremely difficult, and failure results in permanent disgrace. And you're going to face Desha? Sarah Park asked. Your sister, who's supposedly the greatest military strategist in the Empire. Yes, Kessa said. She looked at Marcus. I'm sorry for not consulting you first, but this was the only way to resolve the situation without forcing you to choose between the Alliance and keeping me. If I win, my father must acknowledge my autonomy and my right to remain here. If I lose, I return home, and you can select another consort without political complications. What are the trials? Marcus asked. They vary depending on who is being challenged and who does the challenging. Kessa said, given that I am challenging my sister's assertion that she is more suitable than I am, the trials will likely test strategic thinking, problem-solving, scientific knowledge, diplomatic capability, and practical application of skills. She smiled slightly. Essentially, everything I have never been Aloe. The neutral station called Concordia floated in the space between territories, a massive structure built by the Galactic Council specifically for events requiring impartial ground. Its observation chambers could hold thousands of spectators. And for the Valoran trials, every seat was filled representatives from 27 different civilizations had come to witness what many were calling the most unusual diplomatic challenge in recent history. Marcus stood in a viewing area reserved for the human delegation, looking down at the arena floor where the trials would take place beside him. Lieutenant Sarah Park studied the assembled crowd with tactical awareness. This is bigger than I expected, she muttered. Half the known galaxy is watching. Cassa's story resonated with a lot of people, Marcus said. The overlooked one getting a chance to prove herself. It's a narrative that crosses cultural boundaries on the opposite side of the arena. Emperor Thalarix sat with his entourage. The other 5 daughters were there too, their bioluminescence creating a dazzling display that drew eyes from across the chamber. At the center of that luminous family sat Desha, the eldest daughter, even from a distance. Marcus could see why she was considered the pride of the Valoran Empire. She radiated confidence and capability, her very presence commanding attention. Then Kessa entered the arena floor. She wore the simple formal robes Marcus had seen her prepare, and next to her sister's brilliance, she looked almost invisible. The crowd's murmuring reflected this. Many seemed confused about why this unremarkable Valoran was worth such attention as so much. Galactic Council adjudicator stepped forward, a being from the neutral Kresh species whose crystalline form refracted light in complex patterns. We are gathered to witness formal trials under Valoran tradition, the adjudicator announced, its voice resonating through translation systems. Princess Kessa has invoked the right of proving, challenging the assertion that she is unsuitable for her chosen position. She will face Princess Desha in 5 trials, judged by a panel of neutral experts. The trials will test strategic thinking, scientific knowledge, diplomatic capability, practical problem-solving, and adaptive intelligence. The adjudicator gestured to a panel of 5 beings seated in a separate area. A Zor military commander, a human physicist, a Valoran cultural expert, a Physian diplomat, and a Kreshner engineer. These judges will evaluate each trial and declare a victor. The challenger must win at least 3 of 5 trials to succeed in her claim. Marcus felt his stomach tighten. 3 out of 5 against someone who had been trained since birth to excel in exactly these areas. The first trial began immediately. It was a tactical simulation. Both sisters were given command of identical fleets and tasked with defending a colony against a superior attacking force. The simulation ran on holographic displays visible to the entire audience. Sefesha moved with practiced precision. Her fleet formations were textbook perfect. Her responses to enemy movements elegant and efficient. She used classic Valoran tactics, concentration of force, decisive engagement, protection of critical infrastructure. It was masterful. And the crowd responded with appreciation. Cass's approach was different. She split her forces in ways that initially looked chaotic. She abandoned certain defensive positions entirely. She focused resources on evacuating civilians rather than engaging the enemy directly. The crowd murmured in confusion. Even Marcus, watching from above, wasn't sure what she was doing. Then the simulation clock hit the 30-minute mark, and everything changed. The enemy forces, having pushed deep into the system expecting continued resistance, found themselves overextended as scattered forces suddenly reformed around them, cutting supply lines and isolating combat groups. Positions she'd abandoned turned out to be tactical baits. The resources she'd spent on evacuation meant she could make decisions without worrying about civilian casualties in 45 minutes. Kessa had completely destroyed the attacking force while suffering minimal losses. Stesh's simulation, running in parallel, showed her still engaged in a grinding defensive battle that she would eventually win, but at significant cost. The Zor military commander on the judging panel stood. The first trial goes to Princess Kessa, he announced. Her unorthodox tactics demonstrate superior strategic flexibility and understanding of asymmetric warfare. The crowd erupted in surprise conversation. Theseus' bioluminescence flickered briefly, a sign of shock, before she regained her composure. The second trial was scientific. Both sisters were given an unknown substance and asked to determine its composition, properties, and potential applications using available equipment. Thesha worked methodically through standard analytical procedures. She had clearly done this thousands of times before. Her movements were efficient, her notes precise. Within 2 hours, she had produced a comprehensive report on the substance. Kessa took a different approach. She spent the first 30 minutes just observing the substance under various conditions, making notes that seemed almost philosophical rather than scientific. Then she began her analysis. But she combined techniques from multiple scientific traditions, including some that the judges later confirmed came from obscure human and Krishna research methodologies. Her final report took 3 hours to produce, but when she presented it, the human physicist on the panel leaned forward with visible interest. Princess Kessa has not only identified the substance and its properties, the physicist announced, but has also proposed 3 potential applications that represent genuinely novel thinking. Princess Thesha's analysis is flawless but conventional. This trial goes to Princess Kessa. 2-0. Marcus saw Thesha's expression change. The confidence was still there, but now it was joined by something else, real concern. The third trial was diplomatic. Both sisters were placed in separate chambers and given the same scenario: negotiate with a hostile species threatening to withdraw from a critical treaty. The species in question was played by actual diplomats who had agreed to participate. Thesha's negotiation was a masterclass in formal diplomacy. She offered concessions strategically, applied pressure at precise moments, and eventually reached an agreement that preserved the core of the treaty while making minimal compromises. The Phasean diplomat on the panel nodded appreciatively. Then they watched Kessa's attempt. She began by asking the hostile diplomats about their personal concerns rather than jumping into formal negotiations. She listened more than she spoke. She acknowledged their frustrations without immediately offering solutions. It looked like she was failing, wasting time on irrelevant conversation. Then, 20 minutes in, one of the hostile diplomats said something about resource distribution that Kessa immediately recognized as the real issue beneath the formal complaint. She reframed the entire negotiation around that core concern. Within 40 minutes, she had reached an agreement that not only preserved the treaty, but actually strengthened it by addressing underlying tensions that would have caused problems later. This trial is difficult to judge, the Fuzian diplomat said. Princess Desha demonstrated excellent formal diplomatic technique. Princess Kessa demonstrated superior understanding of underlying psychology and long-term relationship building. The diplomat paused. I award this trial to Princess Kessa, with acknowledgement that both performances were exceptional. 3-0. The crowd was now completely engaged. Their earlier dismissiveness replaced by genuine interest. Even Emperor Thalarix was leaning forward in his seat, his bioluminescence patterns showing what Marcus's cultural briefing identified as intense focus. The fourth trial was practical engineering. Both sisters were given a damaged spacecraft system and asked to repair it using limited tools and materials. Thesha approached it like a technical problem, diagnosing the issue through systematic analysis and applying standard repair procedures. Her work was competent and would certainly result in a functional system. Kessa looked at the problem differently. She identified that while Desha's approach would work, it would take significant time and use most of the available materials instead. Kessa improvised a repair using unconventional components in ways they weren't designed for, but that achieved the same result faster and more efficiently. The Krishna engineer judge studied both repairs carefully. Princess Desha's repair is by the manual, exactly as one would be taught in formal training. The engineer said, Princess Kessa's repair shows creative problem-solving and resource efficiency. The engineer paused, considering, however, Princess Desha's repair is more likely to be reliable long-term. This trial goes to Princess Desha. 3-1. Kessa had won, but the final trial remained. The fifth trial was described only as adaptive intelligence, and neither sister knew what it would involve until it began. The adjudicator presented them with a scenario. A generation ship carrying 10,000 refugees was experiencing cascading system failures. Life support, propulsion, power generation, and communications were all failing. Simultaneously, the sisters had limited resources to allocate and had to determine how to save as many lives as possible. Both were given the same information and 1 hour to develop a solution. Thesha worked with focused intensity. Her solution, when presented, was ruthlessly efficient. She prioritized the most critic